I wish I could forget what I saw that night. I wish I could erase the sound, the scent, the way the air changed the moment I stepped into the hallway. But no matter how many times I close my eyes and try to convince myself it wasn't real, the memory still claws its way back, raw, vivid, and impossible to ignore. It started like any other evening. Dad had gone out of town for one of his overnight business meetings, leaving the house unusually quiet. I had just gotten home from a late-night study session, drained and barely holding myself together. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the walls, and all I wanted was a hot shower and sleep. But then I heard something, a muffled sound, soft yet urgent, too strange for silence, too rhythmic for comfort. It was coming from my parents' bedroom. I paused at the end of the hallway, my breath caught in my throat. Maybe the TV had been left on, or she was talking on the phone. I tried to reason with myself, but my curiosity had a mind of its own. Slowly, cautiously, I stepped closer, the floor creaking beneath my bare feet. And then I heard it again, a moan. Not just any moan. It was low, feminine, and achingly real. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the door. My heart thudded wildly as the truth began to bloom in my chest like a bruise. Number it couldn't be. Not her, not my mother. But I couldn't walk away either. Not without knowing, not without seeing. So I pushed the door open. Just a crack. What I saw through that sliver of space has lived behind my eyes ever since. My mother was on her knees on the bed, her robe discarded on the floor, her skin glowing under the golden wash of the lamp, her back arched in pure surrender. And in front of her, pressed flush between her thighs, was another woman. Her hands gripped my mother's hips like they belonged there. Her mouth was buried in her, slow, deliberate. The sounds, the way my mother's head fell back, her lips parted in a silent cry. I couldn't breathe. I snapped the door shut and stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself in the hallway. My stomach twisted and my face burned. I didn't know whether to scream or cry or fall to the floor and disappear into the carpet. My mother, my sweet, quiet, perfect mother, was having an affair with a woman. I made it back to my room, barely, and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there under my covers, listening to the blood rush in my ears, feeling like the walls were closing in. Everything I knew about my family, about my mother, it cracked, then shattered. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to understand. I wanted answers, but I was too afraid to ask the questions. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She greeted me in the kitchen with a soft, "Good morning, baby," her eyes warm and her smile unshaken. I stared at her across the kitchen table, trying to see some kind of change, something in her face, in her tone, anything. But she was her, as if nothing had happened. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "You look pale." "I didn't sleep well," I mumbled, my voice dry and distant. She nodded, sliding a mug of coffee across the table. "I figured. You've been pushing yourself too hard lately." I watched her fingers as they brushed the handle of her mug. Elegant, steady, almost too composed. Those were the same hands I saw gripping that woman's shoulders the night before. The same hands that pulled a stranger into her warmth. And now they were casually pouring milk into my cereal like nothing had changed. But everything had. That day stretched on endlessly. Every look she gave me felt heavier, loaded with a meaning she didn't know I had discovered. Every time she touched my arm or brushed my hair from my face, it sent a shiver down my spine. Not out of disgust, but confusion. Confusion that scared me more than anything else. Because the truth I hadn't admitted out loud, the truth I'd never even said to myself, was that something inside me stirred the moment I saw her that night. A reaction I wasn't prepared for. I should have been shocked, angry, horrified. But instead, I felt something else. Something closer to longing. Something deep, dark, and wrong. And the worst part? I didn't want it to stop. I kept imagining it. Not the woman, not the stranger, but her, my mother. The way her body curved under the golden light. The way she gasped and arched her back. The quiet desperation in her voice. I saw it over and over again, like my mind refused to let it go. And then I started to wonder, had I caught her in the act, or had I been waiting to? That night, I stood outside her bedroom door again. I didn't mean to. I had only meant to pass by. But my feet stopped, and I lingered there, listening. No moans this time, no stranger, just silence. But somehow that silence was louder than the noise had been. I pressed my palm flat against the door, my heart thudding against my ribs like it wanted out. I was breathing heavier than I should have been. I wanted to knock. I wanted to say something, but I just stood there, listening to the silence. That was the moment I realized I couldn't run from this. Whatever I had seen, whatever it awakened in me, it wasn't going to fade. And I didn't know how to stop it. I kept telling myself it was wrong, that what I saw should have made me feel disgusted or betrayed or maybe even shattered. But instead, it clung to my skin like a second layer, haunting me in the quiet moments, whispering through my thoughts like a ghost. I couldn't unsee it. And deep down, I wasn't even sure I wanted to. The next few days were a blur of avoidance. I dodged eye contact at breakfast, kept my answers short, stayed out longer after school, and left my headphones on even when nothing was playing, just so she wouldn't try to talk to me. But she did. My mother wasn't the type to let tension go unnoticed. She'd always been attentive, almost painfully so, and now that I was pulling away, she only reached in closer. "You're quiet lately," she said one evening, her eyes watching me from across the living room. "Something happened at school?" I nodded without looking up. "Yeah, exams." It was a lie. She probably knew that. She leaned forward on the couch, fingers threading through her hair, her robe cinched loosely around her waist. I caught a glimpse of her bare thigh as the fabric shifted, just a glimpse, and I swallowed hard, forcing my gaze back to my phone. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" she said gently, like she meant it. I knew, and that was exactly the problem. I couldn't stop remembering the way her voice had sounded that night. Not soft like now, but breathless, tinged with desire, trembling with release. It echoed in my mind, blending into my thoughts until I couldn't tell what was memory and what was fantasy. I hated myself for it. Hated the way I was beginning to crave those moments in secret, replaying them when I was alone. But the more I tried to push it away, the more it pulled me back in. It was a Wednesday evening when everything shifted. Dad was still out of town. Some emergency extended his stay, and it was just the two of us in the house again. I had just finished showering, and the towel clung to my skin as I stepped into the hallway. The mirror in the bathroom was still foggy, and I stood there for a moment, looking at my reflection, heart beating faster than I could understand. Then her voice came from behind me. "Forgot your clothes?" I jumped slightly and turned. She was standing just outside the bathroom door, smiling softly, her arms crossed. She wasn't trying to be seductive. She wasn't even trying to catch me off guard. But the moment felt so sharp, so charged, that I could hardly breathe. "No," I mumbled, clutching the towel tighter around me. "Just spaced out." She stepped forward, placing a fresh shirt on the counter. "Here, I figured you might want something more comfortable. It's one of mine." I took it from her, fingers brushing hers. And something passed between us in that second, something electric. I know she felt it too because her smile faltered ever so slightly and her eyes lingered on mine a little longer than they should have. "You've been different lately," she said, voice quieter now. "Is there something you want to talk about?" I stared at her, at the way her lips parted just slightly, the way her hair fell against her shoulder, damp from her own recent shower. She was close, so close that I could smell the jasmine from her lotion. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. She touched my cheek then, her thumb brushing a damp strand of hair from my face. "Sweetheart, whatever it is, you don't have to be afraid." It was too much. The warmth of her skin, the soft tremble in her voice, the way her touch lingered longer than any mother's touch should have. "I saw you," I whispered. My throat tightened instantly. Her eyes flickered, her hand withdrawing slowly. "Saw me?" "That night," I said, my words barely audible. "In your room, with her." A long silence stretched between us. She didn't deny it, didn't panic. She just looked at me. And then something softened in her face. An exhale, a silent confession. "I didn't know you were home," she murmured, eyes falling to the floor. "I wasn't supposed to be," I replied. "But I was, and I saw everything." Another pause. I thought she might yell or apologize or run. But instead, she stepped closer. "And what did you feel?" she asked, her voice almost trembling. I stared at her, my heart crashing against my ribs. I didn't answer, not with words. But I didn't need to. The silence said it all. She nodded slowly, understanding something neither of us had ever said out loud. "You've always been so strong, but I never imagined you'd carry something like this alone." I didn't know if she was talking about what I saw or what I was feeling. Maybe both, maybe neither. Then she touched my hand again. Just that. A simple, small touch. But it sparked through me like lightning, and I didn't pull away. "I'm not proud of what I've done," she said quietly, "but I'm also not ashamed of who I am. And if you're confused, I understand that more than anyone." My throat felt tight. I didn't want to cry. Not in front of her. Not when my body was trembling from the weight of everything I couldn't say. She leaned in slowly, so slowly it was like the air between us had turned to glass, and kissed my forehead. Her lips were warm, gentle, too gentle. I closed my eyes, and for the briefest second, I leaned into her, just for a second. But that second changed everything. Something changed after that night. Not in an explosive, earth-shattering way, but quietly, like a slow leak that eventually floods a room. After she kissed my forehead and I didn't flinch, something invisible passed between us. Something we never said out loud but carried like a weight in every glance, every silence, every time we passed each other in the hallway and our arms almost touched. It was no longer about what I had seen. It was about what I was beginning to feel. I started noticing her more. Not in the way a daughter notices her mother, but in the way a woman notices another woman when something deep and unspoken starts to bloom. I watched the way her robe slipped from her shoulder when she reached for the kettle in the morning, the way her fingers absent-mindedly trailed across her lips when she was thinking. She was beautiful, undeniably, heartbreakingly beautiful, and now that I'd seen the pieces of her she never meant to show me, I couldn't go back to looking at her like I used to. But what haunted me more than anything was how much I wanted her to see me too. I started wearing her shirts to bed, intentionally, not just for comfort. They smelled like her, like the mix of jasmine lotion and linen that seemed to follow her through the house. I'd catch her eyes lingering on me in those moments, just a second too long, a breath too deep. And I lived for that second. Those glances became our language, our secret, our slow descent into something neither of us could name. It was a Tuesday when things cracked again. I had just gotten out of the shower, this time fully clothed, composed, calm, and I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, wine glass half full, reading a book she wasn't really reading. Her eyes lifted the moment I stepped in, and they stayed on me, heavy and unreadable. "You look older today," she said softly. I blinked. "What do you mean?" I don't know. There's something in your face. You're not a girl anymore." That hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed the lump in my throat and crossed my arms. "Do you miss being someone else's girl?" Her expression didn't change, but her eyes did. A flicker of something. Regret, desire, guilt. Maybe all three. "I don't know what I miss anymore," she replied, "but I know what I remember." There was a long pause between us. Neither of us moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, but even that seemed distant. "What do you remember?" I asked, stepping closer. She closed the book slowly and set it aside. "I remember what it felt like, to be wanted, to be seen, to be touched like I was the only one in the world." Her voice cracked slightly on that last word, and my breath caught. She wasn't talking about my father. I knew that now. Maybe she hadn't felt that way with him in years. Maybe that woman I saw in her bed was the first person who made her feel anything at all. But now I was the one standing here, closer than I should have been, looking at her with eyes that no daughter should have. I moved to sit across from her, my fingers brushing hers on the table as I reached for the untouched wine glass. I didn't drink from it, just held it, feeling the warmth of where her hand had been. "Do you feel wanted now?" I whispered. She looked up at me then, her eyes dark and glassy. "I don't know what I feel," she said, almost breathless. "But it scares me." "Why?" Because it's you." Her voice broke then, and so did the air between us. I should have gotten up. I should have laughed it off, called it inappropriate, walked out of the kitchen and slammed my bedroom door. But I didn't. I stayed. Because her honesty cracked something inside me wide open. And all I wanted in that moment was her. Not as a daughter, not as a girl in need of answers, but as someone who had seen her, truly seen her, and still wanted more. "You think I haven't felt it too?" I asked. She stared at me like I had just confessed to something holy and horrible at the same time. "I see the way you look at me," I added. "And it's not just guilt. It's not just fear. It's curiosity. And maybe something deeper than that." She looked away, her hand pulling back as if it had been burned. "You're my daughter," she whispered. "Then why does it feel like something else?" That question hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. She was trembling, barely, but I saw it. Her shoulders rose with every breath like she was holding back something heavy. "Tell me to stop," I said. "If this is wrong, if this is something we'll regret, just say it." She didn't. Not then. She just looked at me, and her eyes said more than words ever could. They said, "I've tried, I'm scared, I shouldn't, and I want to," all at once. It was enough. I leaned in slowly, not to kiss her, not to touch her, not yet, but just to be close enough to feel the warmth of her breath on mine. My pulse was thunder in my ears. She was right there, inches away, her lips quivering with restraint. My mother. And still, somehow, not just that. "I can't," she finally whispered, pulling back. "I can't do this to you, to us." I nodded, even though my heart sank like a stone. "I just needed to know," I said softly, "what we were dancing around." She stood up, shaky, her eyes misted. "We can't dance around this anymore." I didn't follow her as she left the kitchen. I stayed in my seat, gripping the wine glass she'd touched, the memory of her breath still clinging to my skin. We hadn't crossed the line, not yet, but we were standing right at its edge, and neither of us was ready to walk away. There was no going back to normal after that, whatever normal even meant for us at that point. We began moving through the house like ghosts tethered by glances, close enough to feel each other's presence, but never touching, never daring to finish the sentence we had started that night at the table. Still, it lingered, like perfume in a room long after someone has left. I could feel her everywhere, in the soft creak of the stairs when she passed my room, in the way her fingertips brushed the countertop longer than necessary, in the silence we shared when we found ourselves alone and had nothing appropriate left to say. I began to understand that sometimes love doesn't announce itself with fireworks or declarations. It just seeps into you quietly, taking root beneath your ribs and building a home in all the spaces you swore you'd never open. The days were tense, heavy with words unsaid, but the nights, they were worse. I'd lay in bed, haunted not by guilt, but by aching want. Not a teenage craving or misplaced admiration, but a visceral need to be seen, held, known in a way that only she, my mother, had unknowingly begun to do. The kind of knowing that came from vulnerability, shared silence, and stolen truths. I'd hear her footsteps pacing some night, and in the dark I imagined her wrestling with the same questions, the same weight of something unspoken but undeniable. And as twisted as it sounds, that brought me a strange comfort, that I wasn't alone in this. Then came the rain. It poured one Friday evening, drowning the entire house in cold and gray. The power went out around dinner, leaving the kitchen dim with only the flicker of candles and the sound of rain pounding against the windows. She was standing by the sink, staring outside like the sky could answer all the questions we had buried between us. I stood behind her, arms crossed, not daring to move too close, but feeling pulled by an invisible thread that wouldn't loosen. She spoke without turning around. "I used to love storms when I was younger. My mom would make hot tea, and we'd curl up under the same blanket like it was the safest place on earth." I replied, barely above a whisper. "I've never really liked storms. They make everything feel too loud, too real." She turned then, slowly, her face soft in the candlelight. "Maybe that's why I like them now." There was a pause, that familiar, suffocating pause where neither of us knew what we were anymore, but both of us knew we weren't just mother and daughter. I stepped closer, compelled by the same quiet force that had haunted me since the night I caught her in the act. It wasn't jealousy I'd felt back then, it was awakening. The terrifying realization that I wasn't repulsed. I was intrigued, that what I had stumbled upon wasn't a mistake, but a door. "Do you want some tea?" she asked, her voice suddenly delicate, like she was walking on thin ice inside herself. "No," I answered, not breaking our gaze. "I want to talk." She nodded slowly, drying her hands on a dish towel she didn't seem to realize she was still holding. "So talk." I took a breath, one that felt like it traveled from the base of my spine to my throat. "That night in the kitchen, you said you remembered what it was like to be wanted. I haven't stopped thinking about that." Her shoulders stiffened, but her eyes stayed locked to mine. "You shouldn't have to carry that. It's not yours." "But it is," I said, stepping even closer now. "You didn't touch me. You didn't say anything wrong. But you made me feel something. Something I can't explain. And it's not going away." She turned fully toward me now, her hands gripping the edge of the counter behind her, knuckles pale. "Do you think I don't feel it too?" she asked, and there it was. An admission. Not of guilt, but of conflict. Of all the ways we were both falling and trying not to hit the ground. The silence returned, thick as the storm outside. And then she did something she hadn't done in weeks. She reached for me. It was simple. Just her fingers grazing the edge of my sleeve, but it was enough to undo me. Her touch, hesitant yet hungry, sent a shiver down my spine. She stepped in close enough for me to smell that familiar scent. Jasmine, warm skin, something sweet and soft beneath all her layers. She cupped my cheek, thumb tracing a line just beneath my eye. "You don't know what this could do to us," she said, but her hand never left my face. I leaned into her touch. "I know what it's already done to me." She breathed out sharply, like she'd been holding that breath since the day I walked in on her. Then she kissed my forehead again, but this time there was nothing maternal about it. It lingered, warmer, fuller, almost trembling. She didn't pull away immediately. Her lips stayed there, pressed to my skin like a question she was too afraid to ask. When she finally stepped back, her eyes were glassy. "If we go any further, we can't pretend anymore." "I don't want to pretend," I answered, almost ashamed of how true that felt. She looked down, hands clenched, breath uneven. "You should be out there, falling in love, making mistakes, not this." "But what if this is the mistake I need to make?" I asked, and I meant it. God, I meant it. She looked at me like she was torn between slapping me and pulling me into her arms. And maybe she wanted to do both. Maybe that's what forbidden love looks like, fighting the urge to destroy and protect someone all at once, to push them away before you ruin them, even though you're the one who might not survive without them. Then she said something that hollowed me out completely. "Part of me wishes you never saw me that night." I blinked. "Why?" "Because I don't know how to stop seeing you now." We stood there for what felt like hours. The rain slowed, the candles flickered, and the space between us shrank with every breath. We didn't touch again that night. We didn't need to. The damage was done. And the want, so deep, so wrong, so tender, was carved into us like a scar that would never fully heal. I should have gotten out of the car. I should have walked away the second we pulled into the driveway, but I didn't. I stayed. And so did she. The engine was still humming beneath us. The radio played something soft in the background, just barely there, like it didn't want to interrupt the silence hanging between us. But that silence wasn't empty. It was thick, pulsing, laced with everything we couldn't say aloud. She shifted in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel like she was anchoring herself. I sat beside her, frozen, my breath shallow, my fingers clenching the hem of my sweater. My mind was screaming at me to move, to run, to breathe. But she turned to me, and her eyes were already full of something I couldn't run from. "I shouldn't feel this way about you," she whispered, voice cracking with restraint. "But I do." I swallowed hard. My throat burned with everything I'd been holding back. "Then don't say it," I replied, my voice barely audible. "Just show me." She reached out, hesitantly at first. Her hand found mine in the space between our seats, and her fingers curled around mine like they were desperate to remember something soft in a world that kept turning cold. I didn't pull away. We didn't move for a long time, just sat there, breathing each other in. The quiet cocoon of the car made everything sharper. Her nearness, her warmth, the sound of her swallowing down her guilt, and me, biting back the ache that had built in my chest since the moment I caught her. Then, as if gravity took hold of her, she leaned in. Not fast, not greedy, just sure. The way her lips touched mine was like a promise she couldn't take back. It wasn't the kiss of a mistake. It was the kiss of a confession. I responded before I could think. My hand reached for her cheek, pulling her closer, needing more. She gasped softly into my mouth, and it made something inside me snap. The way her hands found my waist, trembling but desperate, the way she leaned across the center console just to feel me. It wasn't polished or planned. It was messy, human, real. The windows fogged almost immediately, our breaths swirling like secrets caught in glass. She broke the kiss, but didn't go far. Her forehead rested against mine, her lips still brushing mine as she whispered, "I've never done this before. Not like this." I could barely respond. My chest heaved with everything unsaid. Neither have I. But I want it. I want you. Her fingers slid down my arm, pausing at my wrist, gripping it gently, like she was trying to anchor herself to the truth. "We're crossing something we can't uncross," she warned. "We already did," I said. And just like that, we surrendered again. The heat between us wasn't rushed. It built slow, aching, tender. She kissed me again, deeper this time. My hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer. Her lips brushed my jaw, then down my throat, each touch burning like it had been stored away for too long. I shifted, straddling her lap, the gear shift awkwardly pressing into my thigh, but I didn't care. She held me like she never wanted to let go. Her hands slid up beneath my sweater, her fingers ghosting along my spine, drawing shivers from me with every pass. "I keep dreaming about you," she murmured against my skin, "even when I'm awake." "Then stop dreaming," I breathed. "Start remembering." Her mouth found mine again, harder now, more certain. Every kiss was laced with apology and craving. I gripped her shoulders and closed my eyes, letting her touch erase every boundary I'd ever been told not to cross. The console between us creaked under the weight of us both. Our legs tangled, breaths quickened, lips parted only to gasp. She tasted like warm air and secrets. And I couldn't get enough. We didn't care about the neighborhood, the possibility of someone seeing the shadows we made against the windows. It was just us. Us in this car. In this moment. In this wrong thing that suddenly felt like the only real thing we'd ever had. And in the middle of it all, she pulled away, just slightly, just enough to look at me. Her eyes were wild, glassy, scared. "Tell me to stop." I didn't. Instead, I cupped her face and whispered, "Don't stop." That was all it took. We fell into each other like two people who had been waiting their whole lives to be found. Her hands mapped every part of me like she wanted to memorize the places that made me gasp, and I gave her every sound she wanted to hear. The car was our shelter, our confessional, our sin. By the time we collapsed against each other, flushed and tangled, the engine had long gone quiet. We didn't speak, just sat there in the dark, our breaths heavy, her arms around me like she was afraid to wake up and find me gone. And yet, even in that warmth, I felt it creeping in. The world outside. The reality. The door we'd just walked through, the one we couldn't go back from. I rested my head against her shoulder. "What now?" I asked. She didn't answer. And maybe that was the answer. I keep asking myself what it means. That night in the car, what we did, what we felt. Was it real? Was it love? Or was it just loneliness dressed up in the shape of something forbidden? I know what you're thinking. I know how it sounds. But when someone looks at you like they see you, not the version you're supposed to be, but who you really are, you start to lose the ability to care about right and wrong. So tell me, was I wrong? Because I'd do it again. And something tells me she would too. Stay tuned.